October 1934. Cambridge, England. The ancient stone courtyards of Trinity College sit beneath a gray autumn sky, the air carrying the smell of coal smoke and damp leaves. Inside the lecture halls and common rooms of one of the world's most prestigious universities, the brightest young men in Britain are preparing to inherit the world. They will become diplomats, intelligence officers, cabinet advisors, the architects of British foreign policy for a generation. They already know this. It has never been in question. What Britain does not know, what no one yet suspects, is that 5 of these men have already chosen a different master. In the early 1930s, the Great Depression has shattered the confidence of the Western world. Unemployment, hunger, the visible failure of capitalism across Europe and America, and rising against this backdrop, 2 competing visions of the future: fascism crawling out of Germany and Italy, and communism radiating outward from Moscow with the force of a new religion. For a generation of brilliant young men raised on British class privilege, and educated to believe in rational solutions to human problems, the choice seemed, for a moment, almost logical. The Soviet Union, they believed, was building something new. The first and most important of the 5 was Harold Adrian Russell Philby, known to everyone simply as Kim. Philby was recruited to Soviet intelligence in 1934 by a Viennese communist named Arnold Deutsch, a man of extraordinary psychological skill, who identified and cultivated ideological vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Philby was everything the Soviets needed: brilliant, well-connected, utterly composed, and possessed of a social confidence so complete that it functioned as its own cover. He would go on to rise through the ranks of MI6, British Foreign Intelligence, eventually becoming head of its anti-Soviet section. For years, every operation MI6 ran against Soviet intelligence passed across Philby's desk before it reached Moscow. Every agent, every network, every name. Guy Burgess was a different creature entirely. Loud, brilliant, chaotic, and almost deliberately self-destructive. He worked at the BBC, then at the Foreign Office, drinking heavily, making enemies and admirers in equal measure, and passing enormous quantities of classified material to his Soviet handlers with a casualness that, in retrospect, seems almost insane. Donald Maclean was quieter, more tortured, a senior Foreign Office diplomat who for years provided Moscow with the contents of Anglo-American nuclear discussions, the internal communications of the Western Alliance, and detailed intelligence on the early development of NATO. Anthony Blunt became a senior officer in MI5, British Domestic Intelligence, and passed to Moscow the identities of British agents, surveillance operations, and counterintelligence methods. The 5th member, John Cairncross, worked at Bletchley Park and passed to the Soviets thousands of decoded German military communications during the Second World War. For nearly 2 decades they operated. Meetings in dark London streets, documents passed in parks and underground stations, coded messages and dead drops. The apparatus of British intelligence, built on class trust and the assumption that men of their background simply could not be traitors, protected them far longer than any tradecraft could have. When suspicion finally began to close in during the early 1950s, Burgess and Maclean fled to Moscow in May 1951, warned by Philby himself. Philby came under intense suspicion, but was never charged, the evidence insufficient, his composure unbreakable. He continued working, was even cleared by the Foreign Secretary in Parliament. He did not defect until 1963, vanishing from Beirut one January night and reappearing in Moscow weeks later. Blunt was confronted in 1964 and confessed, in exchange for immunity, his secret kept by the British government for 15 years. Cairncross confessed in stages over decades. What the Cambridge Five handed to the Soviet Union across 20 years of espionage was not simply information, it was architecture. The architecture of Western intelligence, Western alliances, Western nuclear strategy, the names of agents who died because of what they passed, the operations that failed because Moscow already knew, the trust between allies that fractured when the scale of the betrayal became clear. They were 5 men who had been given everything their world had to offer, and who chose, in the quiet of their convictions, or their cowardice, or their complexity, to give it all away. History has never quite agreed on what to call them: traitors, idealists, spies. The answer, like the men themselves, refuses to resolve into anything simple.